Humans have shown throughout their history they are capable of feats of miraculous survival. Although it may appear our physical forms are not all that tough when compared to other creatures in the animal kingdom, the truth is there are many people who survived crazy situations that most of us would generally not be able to live through. In a combination of sheer willpower, medical knowledge, and technology, people have been able to survive some really crazy freak accidents. These true survivor stories show us that even in the bleakest of situations, you can sometimes make it out okay. It's a good thing too, because humans seem to be able to find themselves in all kinds of bizarre situations that cause shocking injuries. Whether it is a freak accident or a stupid stunt, these unbelievable tales demonstrate the remarkable people who survived the odds, despite the horrendous injuries they sustained. Anatoly Bugorsky was hit with a proton beam. In 1978, Russian physicist Anatoly Bugorsky was involved in an accident where a proton beam hit him in the head. The beam had been sped up to almost the speed of light in a particle accelerator, similar to the one used at CERN, as part of an experiment in Russia. At the time, medics and scientists were unsure what damage could be caused by the collision, as nothing like this had ever happened before, but most assumed it would likely kill Bugorsky. He was subjected to more than 400 times the lethal dose of ionizing radiation when he was hit. Bugorsky did not feel any pain at the time the proton beam hit, but did say he saw a light brighter than anything he had ever witnessed. It seemed like the physicist was incredibly lucky. Besides part of his face swelling up to twice its normal size, there were relatively few side effects. When the swelling went down, the left side of his face was paralyzed and he was deaf in his left ear, but he went on to live an almost completely normal life and even completed his PhD. Roy Sullivan was struck by lightning 7 times. Roy Sullivan was a U.S. park ranger who worked at Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. During his life, he was struck by lightning a world record 7 times, each in its own separate incident. In the 35 years between the first and 7th strikes, he was never seriously injured, but did suffer from burns and get knocked out several times. Still, based on Sullivan's description, they were hardly pleasant experiences. Ever been shocked real bad? It's worse. Ever been scalded? It's much worse. It's like being cooked inside your skin. He considered his 4th strike in 1972 the worst, and claimed to have been struck as a child while helping his father in the garden when he was a boy, although it did him no damage. Sullivan died in 1983 when he killed himself with a gunshot wound to the head, supposedly due to an unrequited love. His status as a human lightning rod also caused some loneliness. As Sullivan explained, naturally, people avoid me. I can't blame them. Who wants to be near somebody that's all the time getting hit by lightning? Anna Bagenholm was submerged in freezing water for 80 minutes. When Anna Bagenholm, an orthopedic surgeon from Sweden, had a skiing accident in 1999, she almost certainly should have died. While she was skiing in Norway, she lost control of her skis, fell headfirst onto a frozen stream near a waterfall, and somehow slid through an open gap in the frozen water. Her body became trapped under the ice, which was about 20 meters thick. She found a small air pocket to breathe, and she suffered circulatory arrest due to the cold temperatures after 40 minutes. In total, she sat in the water for nearly an hour and a half. During that time, her body temperature went as low as 56.6 degrees Fahrenheit due to extreme hypothermia. It took a team of over 100 medics at a nearby hospital 9 hours to bring her back to life. It took an extra 2 months for her to recover from paralysis and gain back most of her bodily functions. By 2009, she only suffered from some minor nerve damage issues. It was speculated the extreme cold slowed down her metabolism, meaning her cells needed much less oxygen to survive. Ron Hunt had an industrial drill forced through his skull. In 2003, Ron Hunt was a construction worker working in Truckee, California. As he was working on a job, his ladder suddenly gave way, sending Hunt and the drill he was holding down to the ground. Following standard practice, he attempted to throw the industrial power drill he was holding as far away as possible to avoid hitting it. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed, and his head clashed with the metal tool. The 18-inch-long, 1.5-inch-thick drill bit forced its way through his eye and out of the right side of his skull. By a miraculous stroke of luck, the drill didn't tear through his brain tissue but instead pushed it aside. This meant there was no damage to his brain, but his eye was injured pretty badly. Surgeons took out the drill by unscrewing it from his eye. Eva Wisniewska was sucked into a vicious storm for hours. Eva Wisniewska was a 35-year-old German woman who was an experienced paraglider who was internationally known for her paragliding feats. In 2007, she was paragliding in Australia when she ran into a horrific storm. During the worst of it, she was sucked up a vortex at a speed of nearly 50 miles per hour to a maximum height of 32,634 feet, higher than the top of Mount Everest and almost at the point where jumbo jets cruise. As the storm raged around her, the lack of oxygen at that altitude caused her to pass out for around an hour. Somehow she drifted unscathed through temperatures of -40 degrees Fahrenheit as hail and lightning engulfed her body. According to doctors, the fact she passed out may have helped her survive by slowing down her heart rate and bodily functions. This gave her the chance to wake up later after the storm was dying down and then land back to Earth. In the same weather event, a Chinese paraglider named He Zhongping died. Truman Duncan was cut in half by a train. Truman Duncan went through a horrendous ordeal in 2006 when he fell from a moving train in Cleburne, Texas. Duncan, an employee at the rail yards in Cleburne, slipped and fell onto the tracks while he was riding a train moving to a repair dock. He tried to throw himself backward so he wouldn't be crushed, but got caught underneath it. Some 9,000 kilograms of metal passed over him, destroying much of his middle and lower body. Despite being crushed by the train, he remained conscious and was able to phone emergency services from his own cell phone. When Duncan arrived at the hospital, it took surgeons more than 23 operations over a period of 4 months to try to save his life. In all, he lost his left leg, most of his right leg, a kidney, and his entire pelvis. However, he has been able to survive the incident and even went back to work several months later. Only this time in the office, a man had his heart forced into the other side of his chest. When a 48-year-old man was involved in a traumatic motorcycle accident in 2014, doctors discovered something completely mind-boggling. The man's heart had completely rotated and been forcibly moved to the right side of his chest. The craziest part? The man was still alive, conscious, and alert after the crash. Remarkably, the change in position of the heart was not due to the impact of the crash, but rather from a punctured lung. This caused air to pump into the chest cavity, pushing the heart across the body. When the air was removed, the organ slowly moved back into its usual place without any lasting damage. Forthman Murph nearly sawed off his own head. As a lifelong and enthusiastic lumberjack, it shouldn't be a surprise Forthman Murph was still using his trusty chainsaw to chop down trees in his local area at the age of 74. However, in 1984, he suffered an accident that was almost impossible to survive. While he was out trimming trees, a branch fell and knocked him out, throwing him into a ditch. The fall broke his leg and knocked him out. When he finally regained consciousness, he found his still-running chainsaw was cutting through his neck. He stood up, positioned his head so blood wasn't running down his windpipe, and drove himself a half-mile to his neighbor's house. They went to the hospital 17 miles away, where doctors found he had sawn through his windpipe, esophagus, and jugular veins, leaving just the spine and some skin holding his head in place. Several surgeries later, Murph fully recovered and went on to live for another 18 years. Greg Rasmussen crashed a plane in the African wilderness. Wildlife conservationist Greg Rasmussen thought he was going to die in 2003 when his plane was hit by strong winds and crashed in the African bush. Over the next 27 hours, he was subjected to dehydration, painful heat, and a number of animal attacks. This included being charged by stampeding elephants and later being stalked by a lioness and approached by hyenas. Fortunately, Rasmussen was able to drag himself back to the wreckage of his aircraft despite 2 broken legs and a fractured pelvis. By the time he was finally spotted and rescued, doctors feared they would not be able to save his legs. It took surgeons around 100 operations to save them and prevent them from requiring amputation, though he now stands a full 3 inches shorter due to the damage. Phineas Gage's head was impaled with an iron rod. Phineas Gage was a railway worker in the 1800s who was tasked with clearing rocks away so the rack could be laid properly. This usually involved using an iron rod to insert explosives into the rocks before light a fuse to explode the gunpowder. On September 13, 1848, this procedure went wrong, and the explosion occurred earlier than expected, firing the iron rod straight through Gage's head and piercing his brain. Despite the fact that almost anyone who experienced a similar injury would be killed instantly, Gage survived and transported himself to hospital. There, doctors were able to patch up the wounds and keep him alive. The only lasting damage affected his personality and character and his eye. The rod had damaged certain parts of his brain that made him less reliable and diminished his inhibitions. Casey Wagner suffered through a double lightning strike. In 2013, Texan resident Casey Wagner suffered a double dose of bad luck. While standing under a tree during a thunderstorm, something you are advised not to do in such circumstances, he was hit by a lightning bolt that shot through his entire body. The strike caused him to fall to his knees. Unfortunately, another lightning strike occurred almost immediately, shooting through his leg and knee. A passing nurse who witnessed the event was able to provide aid until paramedics arrived. After going through some brief treatment from doctors, he was released without any serious injury. According to Wagner, medics suggested his plastic poncho may have attracted the lightning by generating static electricity.